and welcome back to AR Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I am Amir Bala, and today we are joined by drag race enthusiast slash horror author Rebecca Rossi. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's actually funny. I have been really into horror lately. Horror was not something that I dived into immediately. I was also kind of scaredy cat, if you want to use that terminology. I would use a different word growing up, but you know, PC culture. But when I was growing up, horror was just like, I remember I would have to argue with my friends, like, oh, let's go watch Paranormal Activity, or you know, like whatever the movie was that that was like popping when I was like 14 or 15. And I would just like look at them confused. Why in God's name would I do that? Why would I spend money to evoke that emotion? When I go to an action movie, I'm trying to be Harry Potter, right? I am Vin Diesel. I am driving cars and Fast and Furious. I'm that person. When I watch a comedy, I'm trying to laugh. When I watch a romance, I'm trying to be in that romance. Why would I go and watch a horror movie and shit my pants? Why would I want that? But then something clicked into me when I was in my 20s, and I just loved horror. What was it for you? Did it start early or was it later on?
I was about maybe 14, 15, and my best friend was very much into horror, and she said, you got to watch these movies. And she showed me Saw, The Exorcist, The Devil's Rejects, Shining, House of a Thousand Corpses. And I just remember thinking, wow, like no other genre of movie gives me a feeling quite like this. It's like an adrenaline rush, and I just became addicted. And here we are.
I think what I like the most about horror is and I think it's the reason why a lot of writers actually have a admiration for horror, even if it's not something that they do themselves. Because if I think horror in its essence is one of the most intriguing things of why people are into it, right? I've heard so many interesting takes on why people like horror. There was one episode of Black Mirror that was from a game developer that made horror video games. And he was explaining to the main character, like, why we like horror. It's like the idea that you get to live through your most traumatic experience. You get to go through something that would normally you would die, but you get to live at the end.
That's right.
And I've always loved the idea that it's truly something else. I mean, in science fiction, obviously we don't get to like hang out and high five robots and do all that crazy shit, but it's still somehow in the realm of possibility, right? Like maybe in 300 years that could happen. I don't think we have the idea of like, oh, maybe tomorrow I'm going to run into an interdimensional being and have my soul sucked out. I don't anyway. Maybe somebody else does. But that's not kind of like in the realm of possibilities. So I think horror in the sense that you can kind of go into that and still walk out at the end of the day. I think that's a phenomenal concept. For you, what was it that drew you in to horror? Like what was like the specific things about it, and from like almost like a psychological level? Like what were the movies that really turned on your brain? And it's like, oh, this isn't just a jump scare. They're not just trying to scare me. This is a lot deeper.
Well, from a psychological level, I'm an anxiety sufferer, so I find horror to be quite comforting, which I know sounds strange. You would think, wouldn't that ramp up the anxiety? But when you have fear thrust unexpectedly on you all the time, it's really comforting to choose your fear. I'm choosing to be scared, and that control is really comforting. So I love It is probably my favorite horror movie of all time, and The Shining. Anything paranormal or psychological is my type of horror.
Now, I have to ask, just because we know we do live in kind of like a social media type of thing. Right now, social media is going crazy with the new Netflix show that dropped, Archive 81. Have you heard of it? Are you into it? Have you started watching it?
I have heard of it. I'm very excited to start it, but I have not yet.
I have watched a couple episodes and I am so digged in, because it's another thing that I've noticed about horror movies, right? A lot of the main characters in horror movies are people that are naturally curious, right? It's a journalist, a detective, somebody that has that like there's a reason for them to be investigating some type of X, Y, and Z. So that when they go deeper and deeper into the psychosis, it gives reason. Because I feel like any other person would be like, all right, if I start seeing blood on the wall, I'm out of there. But I guess you kind of understand, it's like, oh, but they're naturally extremely curious. So obviously, how would that person ever be able to stop? You know?
Exactly. That's right.
I think it also speaks to something higher, right? Because imagine if you woke up and you did see something like that unexplainable and you experienced that. How would you ever be able to let that go? How could you?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I'm a very big scaredy cat in real life. I would never stay in a haunted house, but I will gladly watch somebody else stay in a haunted house.
Well,
I'll live through them.
well, I think that's kind of like the beauty of it. That's like the what's awesome about being a horror writer. I would assume I'm not a horror writer myself, but it's that you get to, and I really like your answer. It's the control aspect. It's something that would normally, like I said earlier, make you shit your pants. You kind of get control over it now, and you're able to decide. Well,
Yes, exactly.
I'll decide if I'm scared. I'm watching a movie with my dogs and my significant other. I know I'm comfortable. I can go through what would normally make me die inside. you know.
Exactly. And if you expose yourself enough times, you do start to become desensitized to it.
Yes, yes. I remember when I would watch commercials of the Chainsaw Massacre as a kid, I would have nightmares for 4 days. I'm not kidding. Like real bad ones. It would be intense. And then I watched Chainsaw Massacre and laughed as an adult. It's funny how perspective changes.
Absolutely. I remember I saw The Exorcist as a teenager and I was scarred for life, and I was sleeping in bed with my mom. That's how scared I was. And then I recently rewatched it last year and I was like, this isn't that scary.
Yeah. Yeah, so it kind of like goes into it. How do you mold all these experiences, all these ideas, all these philosophies about horror? How do you mold those into your stories? How do you kind of channel all those energies into your writing?
Well, this is the first horror novel I've written. So I've written some YA fantasy fiction before this, and it's there's no horror elements at all. But my new novella, The Devil Within Me, is very much a possession type story. It is kind of loosely based off The Exorcist a little bit, and the decline of someone who is such a sweet person, how she becomes such an evil person. So you see such a dramatic transformation. I've just drawn on the things that I love to watch and love to read myself.
Wow. I love that concept that it's not a simple thing, that it's almost like a Breaking Bad type of thing where you see a person go from good to bad, and it's from the main character's point of view. So even when they start going down that rabbit hole, you still have empathy for it because it's the main character. You know their experiences, right. You know their emotions. I love that. Could you explain a little bit more who your main character is, where you drew inspirations from, without getting any spoilers? Because obviously people need to buy the book out now. Check out the Amazon page. All the information will be in the bio, description, the banners below. Check it out. Definitely worth it. I read a little bit. Leave me, folks. Worth it.
Thank you. So it follows a character called Deidre Adams. She has an antique store that was run by her parents. Her father since passed away, and her mother is declining from early onset dementia. So she just doesn't have time for a life. She's running the store. And one day she stumbles upon some possessions of her late father's and unlocks this terrible, powerful curse that threatens to consume her soul. And only her two best friends can save her before it's too late. And like I said, I've drawn on The Exorcist a little bit, but I also love any sort of movie or book that has cursed objects in them. So my cursed object in the book is a Russian doll, a Matryoshka doll. And I love anything that has creepy dolls or cursed. Yes, exactly. Yeah, perfect. You'll never look at one the same after you read my book. And I like the idea of a bit of seduction in horror as well, blending a little bit of sex and horror. I think it can be done in a tasteful way, but hopefully people find my writing tasteful.
I have to honestly tell you, I don't know if you've done it before, but that was honestly probably one of the best elevator pitches I've ever heard. Like if you were in an elevator with a Netflix executive and you dropped that knowledge, for sure we'd have a new series for the 2023 fall lineup or whatever they call it nowadays. Because truly, that was perfect. You got the recommendations, the movies and books that it's like, all in like 2 minutes. Man, killed it, honestly. So again, I don't know how that wouldn't have sold you. You need to get the book. But how did you make this inspiration? Where did the idea come from? For example, the Russian doll. We all know, you know how authors go. Nothing is like, oh, I just thought of it one day. There was an inspiration for it. There was a reason for it. What was that? What was that for you?
Well, I read a book last year. It's a nonfiction book called Cursed Objects by J.W. Ucker. Amazing book. You need to read it. And he literally talks about every cursed object in the world, or most of them, and just the conspiracies behind them. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I would love to include Cursed Object in my book. And I spent a lot of time. This book is set in Victoria, Melbourne, where I'm from. I spent a lot of time in this regional town called Daylesford, and they have this amazing antique store there. And I go visit that antique store every time I go to Daylesford. So I wanted to do a homage to that and also include a cursed object. But I also love possession stories. So I thought, okay, the cursed object can unleash a curse. And yeah, basically I just put together everything that I would love to read myself into a story.
Wow, now I'm definitely gonna nerd out a little bit. So bear with me, because it made me think about something. It's like the idea of possession. Can you imagine if like possession was something you could like kind of scan, like detect, the same way that you do with like radioactivity, for example? That's what made me think of it. It was like, imagine if you didn't know the difference between like possession or like, cursed objects and radioactivity. Radioactivity, in a sense, almost seems like a curse, right? You touch it, your body starts decaying, and it's like death. And
yes,
I bring this up because I actually think in the last podcast with C2 Ortega, the pal, the goat, right?
I listened to that one. Yeah.
Yeah. We actually talked about the idea that like, radioactivity was discovered in 1800s by Mary Carey. That means that we lived through thousands upon thousands of years of human history would have no knowledge of an element like radioactivity existing on the land that we've had since ever, right? So imagine in the future that we are able to detect curse. Like imagine if that was just like another element of science that we hadn't detected yet.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of, for me, what I love so much about horror. It's kind of like that blending, like what you said. I think horror is one of like those genres that you can perfectly blend other genres like so beautifully and elegantly. Like you said that you mixed it with like romance, but I've seen it merge beautifully with sci-fi, with spiritualism, with even with comedy. Have you ever watched that movie Cabin in the Woods? Probably
Yes.
one of my favorite movies, honestly, because they just blend the genre so perfectly and also have like almost a critical eye to the genre and its essence.
Yeah, I listened to a horror author speak recently, and she said there's not one genre that you couldn't blend horror with. Like, try and think of one. They all go together in some way or another, and it's true.
No, I'm absolutely I'm in love with it. So going off with the idea of where horror goes and everything, what do you think is your favorite kind of origin of horror? Because there's so many things. There's the paranormal horror, there's alien horror, right? Is it like, are the horrors coming from the skies? Are the horrors coming from within us? Are the horrors coming from below us? It's always something like that, or even something more sci-fi. Maybe it's the horrors of like AI, or the horrors of like, I don't know, some genetic mutation creating monsters or zombies or something like that. For you, what is your favorite kind of horror source?
Definitely paranormal. Anything, demons, ghosts, spirits, vengeful spirits in particular, haunted houses. I love, haunted carnivals. I love dolls, creepy dolls. So I'm a big fan of Chucky and Annabelle and all those movies. Yeah, anything that's not rooted in reality is my type of horror.
Now that's a good answer. Not rooted in reality. So the whole like scope of like writing, right? The whole thing that really draws you into it, even if it's like about the most fantastical thing ever. Game of Thrones is about dragons and magic, but in the essence, it's a story about humans. So that's why you're able to like follow it, because you can relate to Jon Snow, even though you've never had the life of Jon Snow. But you can relate to regret.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can relate to aspirations and XYZ. So how do you take the idea of a situation that is completely out of reality and hone that in so that you can create a story that a person can truly follow?
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely lies in the characters, and that's something I love with writing is character building. I'm more of a character builder than a world builder. So I think what makes horror so effective, maybe in my book, is that Deidre is such a nice, kind, empathetic, loving person. So when she does get possessed, it's such a dramatic transformation that it's disturbing. And you see that in The Exorcist as well with Reagan. She's this little sweet girl. And then by the end, her face is completely transformed. She's speaking in a different voice. That's what makes it so effective and scary.
Wow. It's almost like the corruption of the white rose, if you like, almost like in the biblical type of like sense. It's like
that's right. Yeah.
Wow. I really love that. So kind of departing from the horror and kind of going to like the origins, you actually have a series based in YA fantasy, and as you talked about. Can you speak a little bit to that again for the people that are unaware?
I do. Yeah. So
Woo! Nice.
It's called
try to put it in front of your face. The filter is kind of there we go.
Like this.
Yeah, no, just because the filter is like blurring it out. So if you put it right in front of your face, right, perfect. Astrology Pond, and I love that cover.
Yeah,
honestly.
So that's the first one. This is the second one. It's called Facing the Stars, and then the third and final book in the trilogy is Aligning the Signs. So it is a YA fantasy series about astrology. And about a group of teenagers that band together to save the universe, essentially. And they learn more about themselves through their zodiac signs, and then they meet their counterparts, like the centaur, the crab, and it's a big universe-saving mission.
Wow. All right. You need to tell me more about that. If my girl was here, she'd probably be like losing her entire head. She has all the astrology apps, tells me my horoscope every single day. I'm a Scorpio, so she has 3 paragraphs to tell me every morning. It's honestly, it's one of those things I can't say I've ever had like that much interest into it, but like her interest piques mine. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
So please tell me more about this. So like, who does the story follow? How do the Zodiacs relate? Are the Zodiacs gods? Are they energies? How does it turn into a universe spanning quest? Oh, I'm so excited. Please.
Well, yeah. So basically, it follows a main girl. Her name's Danny, and then she forms a group on Earth with 11 other teenagers. So each member of the group has to be a different star sign. You can't double up, right? So she's the Gemini, so kind of that she was the main character, narcissistic or whatever. And then at the end, they realize that they have a purpose, and they go through a portal that takes them to an alternate reality where all the zodiac signs are at war with each other, and they need to reunite them to keep their universe going. And then a lot more things happen in between that kind of sway them from their mission, that they have to work together to save the universe, essentially. I don't want to give too much away, but
no, definitely. That's definitely something you got to keep under lock and key. Yeah. My God. And a trilogy at that. I mean, like just how well like the number 3 works into numerology and astrology at that. I mean,
yes, yeah.
Well done. Man, I have to ask, just out of my own thing, how is Scorpio doing? Is Scorpio like somehow a bad guy?
Yeah, Scorpio is probably the worst one in the whole thing. Sorry.
Of course.
We had to have a villain. We had to have one villain, and yeah, it was the Scorpio. But it's not what you think. So there are a lot of good Scorpios in the book as well. There's no personal. I don't have any personal feelings towards Scorpios. It's just how it played out.
Oh no! I'm not saying you do. It's one of those things that's like, for example, I was watching Harry Potter for the first time this year. I know, sin.
Wow.
I know, sin. And but I was marathoning it through, and I actually became a huge fan. So back off, internet haters. And it came to the scene that, like, I think like the professor expelled Slytherin from like the little like cafeteria area or whatever they call it. And I remember I was with my the person I was with. I remember I just screamed that I was like, that is horseshit. Because I just like automatically put Scorpio as Slytherin, because like they match up pretty much. So like I was like, hey, that is not fair. We're not all bad. All right.
Not all
exactly. You need to have a fair trial here. You can't just
Yeah.
we're not all Malfoy. I don't have white hair. You gotta calm down.
Exactly.
But I do kind of going off that idea, I do love that inspiration that you came up with it, right? What was the motivation that brought you to that? What was like especially to make a trilogy? I would assume that, well, first of all, I guess a precursor to that question is, would do you consider yourself more of a pantser or a plotter?
Definitely more of a pantser.
Interesting.
I just let it flow and then I edit later. Um, the inspiration was that I got into astrology when I was a teenager as well. My sister was into it, and then I kind of got into it through her. And I noticed that there were lots of non-fiction books about astrology, but there's no fiction fantasy about astrology. And I thought, oh, that would be cool if I wrote something that I would want to read. And originally, I was just going to write the first book and see how it went. And I got to the end, I was like, oh, there's a lot more story that needs to be told here. And it just naturally flowed into a trilogy. And then it just felt right as three separate books ending altogether. So, yeah, it wasn't planned initially to just be a trilogy, but it just happened that way.
All right. So, just from an author's perspective, right? When did you know about book two? Was it halfway through book one, or did you get to the end of book one and realize there's still more story to tell here?
Yeah, I got to the end of book one and I was like, well, we've got to explore more of this. Like, we've got to introduce more characters. We've got to have more of a mission going on. And then I thought, okay, it'll definitely just be two books, like no more than two. And then I got to the end of book two and I was like, no, we got to finish this the right way. So yeah, it was just a natural progression.
It's funny, like I always ask that because I feel like the process of a pantser versus a plotter is night and day. But I feel like the challenges that we face are always something that we kind of like hit the crossroads at. Because even as a plotter that like quote unquote meticulously plotted everything of the story, I still got to the same feeling that when I plotted out my book two, I realized, and the same idea that you just had, oh, no more than two for sure. Part one, part two, over. And then just as I realized when I plotted book two, I realized, oh, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that I missed out on. A lot of stuff that kind of I developed a world around. But those things weren't really necessarily highlighted in that story that I really want to be able to tell. There's a lot more story to tell, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you get to the end of book three and not realize there was a fourth book? Or do you think that you'll make like a spin-off? Is it something like, Percy Jackson, where like it's maybe not from the point of view of Percy anymore, but still in the same, maybe it's a daughter of XYZ and like the Zodiac Wars continued off in the future. Like, who knows? Like, is that something that you plan on, or?
Um, at this stage, I would say no. It kind of feels like it's ended naturally, but I am a never say never kind of person. So if the book's got enough recognition and I had people asking for more, I might be inclined to do a spin-off or something like that. Because there are a lot of characters in my story, a lot. There's literally one for each sign of the Zodiac. So if people are like, oh, we love the Leo, for example, maybe the Leo could have their own spin-off. But it's up to what you guys want, really.
Well, you heard it here. Make sure to reach out. We need more books, honestly, folks. So, well, just a couple things that like immediately popped up when you showed off those books is how beautiful they looked. So
thank you. I love the covers.
Yeah. No, honestly. So outside of the challenges of just writing itself, what were the challenges that you faced in the publication process? Because you are self-published.
Right. So my trilogy is actually published by a proper publishing company. They started off as they were called Inner Light Publishing, then they became Serenity Press, and then they became Making Magic Happen. So they've changed 3 times. So all of my books have different publishing names on the back of them, but it's the same company. And I just stumbled upon them after I finished book 1, and they are kind of a spiritual type publishing company. So they were like, oh, astrology, yeah, we'll take it on. But with the horror novella, that is self-published, but I do call Caleb Ortega my publisher because he has just guided me through everything. He's read my book, he's helped edit it, he's introduced me to marketing myself, to Amazon, everything. So I call him my publisher. And I don't think I could stick with anybody else now. Like Caleb has got me for life now.
No, yeah. Open World Publishing is Caleb's.
Open World Publishing. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Very cool company. Definitely check them out. I think that's openworldpublishing@gmail.com is like their inquiry email. Right. Yes. Will also be in the description. Don't even worry about it, folks. But focusing back on everything that you're doing, right? What would you say were the marketing things that you have lacked before? For anybody listening on that maybe is in that transition themselves, like how do I start to market myself? How do I start to take that path from just turning this from a passion project into a career?
Well, I would definitely recommend having, social media platforms like Instagram and things like that. Connect with like-minded people. Like I have a horror page on my Instagram, and all us horror lovers come together and nerd out over horror. So then, when I start talking about a horror book, they're like, oh yeah, we want to read it. It's just about finding your tribe online, if you will. And I think Caleb said to me, like, every 8th post or every 8th story that you put up, make it about your book or about your writing, so that you're just subtly reminding people that you're still an author and you've got things to offer, which is really great advice.
That is great advice, honestly. Especially that, and it's something that I have caught myself doing many times, that you'll kind of get so adrift in the marketing aspect that you kind of forget to market the fact that you're an author.
Yeah, that's right.
And definitely, I mean, I think that's something that we can all kind of just like always keep in the back of our mind. Great advice. But going on with that note, how did you feel about the editing, for example? Was that something that was tacked on by the publishing company, or did you kind of had the leeway of choose your own editor?
So with my first trilogy, I had an editor that was already part of their publishing company, but the third book, I actually asked my sister-in-law, she's a professional editor, so she did that one. And then with my horror novella, Caleb said, oh, I've got someone that edits my books. She can do yours. And he said that he also looked through it as well. So I had a few eyes looking at my book. And yeah, it was great. She's a great editor. Her name's Mandy Oyster. And she gave me some really honest feedback and really helped me grow as a writer, which I need. So yeah, I highly recommend her. She's also an author as well.
Well, if you don't mind kind of like saying it in public, what were the notes that you felt kind of like really digged into your writing, into that really sunk into making you a better writer?
So I think things that kept coming up in my writing is that I could use more descriptive words or verbs, if you will. Like I kept saying looked, for example, and then Caleb was like, well, you could say glanced or peered or stared, or, it was a lot of looked. I think he tallied like 56 looked in my book. And so then I went through each one and I was like, okay, I'll find a better way to say it. And I think that was the same with walked. He's like, you can say strolled, pranced, blah, blah. So that's something that I will never forget now. Like whatever I write in the future, I'm always going to be, okay, do too many looks, too many walks. How else can you write it? How can you show and tell? Things like that.
I don't know why that reminds me of the first real critique that I got. It was before I even thought of anything writing related, when I just wrote a chapter and I gave it to a friend of mine just to, for funsies. And I remember all he did was I emailed it to him, one random night on, like, let's say Wednesday. And then Thursday morning, I wake up and there's literally a printed out like pamphlet, like dug into my apartment door, like I open the door and it like falls down. I'm like, huh. I pick it up thinking it's going to be like a note, like in like newspaper, like, oh, we have your dog. No, just my chapter with highlights. And I'm talking about colored. Like I thought for a second somebody just decided to color on it for fun. And I realized what it was, that he highlighted every time I use I. I did this, I did that, I did this. And just that, just seeing that he didn't have to write any notes. I knew exactly what I did wrong. Just from that, I was like, yep, that's annoying. And from right there, that drilled into my head. I almost feel like I went overboard now, that I'll go so long without using I and find every other word any other way to write it other than having to say I did this. I'll find anything else. We probably over as a group. Anything else but I.
I'm the exact same. It's burned in my brain now, and it's made me a better writer for it.
Well, one thing that I'm really interested in is writing style. Like the famous Picasso quote is, that it took him 14 years to learn how to paint like Leonardo and Michelangelo, but it took him a lifetime to learn how to paint like Picasso, right? Like himself. So how, especially with like your first book, how is it that you think that you found your own voice? How did you kind of like navigate? Because especially when you're writing your first book or even your second book, there's all these ideas of like what things should be. Like I need to have these many ellipses, this many commas, no semicolons, but M dashes, or however way you think of it in your head. But how did you find your voice, your way of telling your story?
Well, like I said, I'm a big fan of character writing. So I probably do better at being a screenwriter sometimes, I think. I just prefer to focus on people. But what I realized was I wasn't really describing many of the things around me in the book. It was a lot of dialogue, but not much description. So I had to find a balance of both. And I think that shows in my later books. In the first book, you'll see it's mainly dialogue, and then it's built up with more description. But it's really about finding a balance, because you don't want to read a book where like a chair is described, like a whole page is dedicated to describing a chair. You know what I mean? You need to find a bit of a balance. And I also wanted to let my other characters shine over my main character, so that people go, oh, I actually like, the Sagittarius more than the Gemini. Like, she really stood out. Because, the main character is just one part of the story, but I don't want her to take all the spotlight. So I think I've gotten better at doing that and sharing the spotlight among the characters as well. But that's
God, isn't that an interesting concept? I've honestly, from feedback of like my own work, that's kind of what happened with me, where the main character I chose those main characters not because I thought they were the coolest, but because I thought that was the most intriguing point of view for the story. My favorite character was a side character. And a lot of people, and most of the feedback that I get are always like, it's like, oh, I felt Jada was XYZ, I felt Zayko was XYZ. There's great, black and white versions of what, but everyone says, oh, but I loved Haas though. Oh, great character, loved him. And it's kind of just funny how that goes, right? Where the reason you chose the main character isn't necessarily because they're the Harry Potter of the story, but you chose it because like that, it was that emotion that maybe you yourself can connect with the most. I can't connect to Haas the same way I can with Jid and Seiko. I just can't.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that if you ask somebody what is your favorite Harry Potter character, most people wouldn't say Harry Potter. They'd be like, oh, we love Hermione.
Ron, yeah.
Ron, yeah. Exactly.
I don't know. There's one line that literally never escapes me, and it was like I think in like the fourth book when Harry's like going through it. There's like a lot of pressure on him because of the Goblet of Fire, and like people don't know if he really did or didn't do it, and it's like that whole like enigma. And as he's going through all that emotion, Ron is trying to be a friend, and Harry just pushes him away. And instead of like being defensive and being like, oh yeah, well, you know what, fuck you, XYZ, because I would have done that, no doubt, right? If I get attitude, I'm definitely gonna dish it back. He just looked at him and goes like, all right, I'll leave you to your thoughts then, and just walked away with like a somber face. And I was like, man, that's a good friend. Exactly. You know what I mean? Picking up on your energy, and at such a young age too. Like things like that, I think is what people can really relate to. I don't think anyone can relate to fighting Voldemort and beating him with the Elder's Wand. I don't think so. But I think we can relate to being a good friend, or maybe a feeling of inferiority.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you strip it all back, it's like Harry Potter is a story of friendship.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And love. Yeah.
So continuing with the idea of because one thing that I really like of what you said, because I'm a huge world builder. I love world building, but how you described it, your favorite part of it is character building, correct?
Yeah.
So going out with that emotional kind of like development, where have you gone in the past? What were your inspirations for your astrology thing? Like your kind of, if you took away the zodiac signs, the thing like the core of the person, what have you done before? Kind of like emotional things that you've done, and is there any kind of be like any logic, any type of emotions that you want to explore in the future. Maybe you want to write a story from the point of view of, I don't know. There could be 1,000 things that you could write about. Is there anything that you haven't tackled yet that you want to?
In terms of future writing projects, I definitely want to stick with horror. And it's just where I feel most comfortable. And I had such a blast writing my horror novel. Like I've never had an experience like it. The three astrology books that I wrote didn't give me half the experience that I had writing horror. It was such a, it just felt so comfortable, but also pushing me out of my boundaries. I'm like, how can I scare people? Like I want to scare you. I want you to feel something. So I think I'm going to stick with horror. I think I'm going to stick with what I like, which is, possession type stories or things like that. I would love to write a haunted house novel, but I am so bad at description that I don't know how I'm going to go with that. I feel like I need to evolve a lot more as a writer before I tackle the haunted house, if that makes sense.
Well, kind of to expand on the idea for more. Like I really liked how you said that if you strip away all the magical aspects and fantastical aspects of Harry Potter, in its essence is a story about friendship and love, right? If you strip away a lot of Get Out, it's a lot of racial tensions within the United States, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Are there any kind of like ideas like that you want to challenge in the future? Maybe like a bad relationship between a mother and father, maybe a poor relationship between a dysfunctional family situation, or maybe I love Midsummer because it was basically about a breakup and kind of like the acceptance of like something else and like of like other type of love. Like I love that movie because at its essence it was something like so much more significant than what you were being displayed, right? There was so much more. It was almost allegorical. So is there anything that you want to challenge in the future? Any like kind of new dynamics that you haven't done in the past?
I definitely like to do more like not political as such, but definitely tackle more, like show more representation. Like my book has a non-binary character. My main character is half Jamaican, half Indian. I'm just tired of white people, and I just want to have more representation. Have trans characters. Just being more woke in general and representing more, not seeing the same old thing that we see all the time. Gay relationships I'd like to tackle gay relationships in horror as well. Yeah, all of that. I think I'm going to keep on that path.
I love that. And kind of just to wrap it up on this point, something I've been wanting to ask since the beginning of this podcast. How do you scare people? You threw me a great segue with the last thing you said. What is it that makes you scare people, right? Like, what is the thing? How do you do it? Especially in writing, right? Because in movies, it's, you just make us a black screen and like, have like a ghost pop up, that's enough. But how do you convey that emotion in writing? How do you really give a person goosebumps from text?
It's not easy because, like you said, that when you're watching it, you have the music, the build up, the
music is the main one, honestly, huh?
Yeah, the things in your face, the sudden jump scares. But in a book, it's not the same. So I guess I like to, kind of build up to something in a book as well. And like I said, you see Data and she's such a nice person, and then all of a sudden she's saying horrible things. She's doing really disturbing like things that are completely out of her character. And you're like, well, that's not how we started. So this decline is really raising the hairs on the back of my neck. It's just like a subtle thing. But it should be enough to just leave something with you after you close the last page.
It's almost like the subtle eeriness, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
The uneasiness. I love that.
Exactly. The uneasiness. That's right.
I've always liked that about horror, that there's so much suspense in just the idea of perhaps something being there, right? How many times that they'll have the scene where the character's like in front of the mirror and they're about to close it, and you for sure think that when she closes it, there's going to be somebody behind her.
Yes.
And the music is playing and you're like, oh shit. And she closes it and there's nothing there. It's just the anticipation. It's like the thinking that something's going to happen, but it doesn't.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. You know, when you go to sleep,
that's what I love about horror. Yeah.
yeah, when you go to sleep, well, I guess not anymore when you're an adult, but when you were when you were young and you would go to sleep, what scared you more? The idea of like somebody like burging into your house and doing all these crazy things, or that weird silhouette in the corner that you can't really tell? I mean, you're pretty sure it's your coat. You're like 1,000% because, like, you know, when you went to sleep, you put your coat over there, you remember it. But there's something weird about that shadow. I'm pretty sure it moved. It's blinking. I'm 1,000% sure. And that is what lets your brain kind of just like go 1,000.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you'll hear sounds that you wouldn't have paid attention to before.
Yes.
What was that bump? What was that creak on the stair?
Yeah, and then like there's always like people that are always like, oh, the house settling. It's like, yeah, the house doesn't have to settle. Pretty sure the house is here.
Yeah, the house is here. Exactly.
It doesn't need to migrate for food. I'm pretty sure it's pretty good here. But again, there's something about horror that I think it speaks to just a deeper human. Everyone gets scared, you know? Mm-hmm. Not everyone loves sci-fi. Not everyone loves the idea of magic and dragons, but everyone has been scared. I think everyone, even if you don't like horror, can appreciate horror. And if you do appreciate horror, then it's boundless how deep you can get into it. And I love speaking with horror writers, and I love that you started off in YA and fantasy, but then found your home in horror. I love that concept. I truly do, because just diving into this isn't easy. This isn't for the faint of heart whatsoever. Just, even if you are capable of writing 100,000 words, it's a different battle completely to go through the editing phases and to pick your cover and to do all these things and to, start marketing yourself. It's a challenge. And just the fact that you went through it for funsies, knocked out 3 books, and then decided, you know what, horror is actually my home. And the fact that you really found your place in it, I just love it. And I've always said this: when you buy content, the thing that you're buying really is the passion of the creator, in all honesty. That's really what you're buying. If the person that you're getting it from is passionate about the work, it's almost guaranteed to be good. Even if it's not your cup of tea, it's still a decent cup of tea just because they put their foot in it.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, that's their heart and soul. That's their baby.
Exactly. And just the way you've spoken about things, the way you've spoken about horror, I just know that this is your baby. So again, people, pick up the books. And just to cap it off, and since you've already done so perfectly, what is a quick, just little outro that you can tell people? Like, how can you get even more people to buy these books?
The horror one or the fantasy ones?
No, just kind of like give like a quick little just summary of everything, like the Zodiac trilogy, and as well as the horror one, if you could, real quick.
Yeah, well, the Zodiac trilogy, what's called the Signs of the Zodiac series. If you love fantasy and suspense and a group of teenagers coming together and drama and all sorts of wild, wacky adventures, I would definitely recommend picking it up. And you'll learn a lot about yourself too, because I do educate in what astrology is kind of about and the personality type. So you'll learn a lot about yourself. And with horror, if you want a bit of steamy, smutty, but creepy tale of somebody losing their soul, yeah, pick up The Devil Within Me. You'll have a good time. I'm sure you will.
I'm telling you. You should get paid to do those little... I wish anytime I've ever been asked that, I've been able to do that. I've said the story 1,000 times. I got stopped in immigration, and they asked me what I did, and I told them I was an author. They asked me what my book was about, and I'm telling you, I almost went to jail that day because I was like, it's about different things, sci-fi. I don't know. All I could tell them was the name of the book and the 2 main characters, and they were like, "Oh, you don't know anything else?" And I'm like, But you honestly did. No, yeah, you honestly just did a great job with it. So again, pick up the books. Well worth it. And what are you working on right now? What can people look forward to?
I'm actually not working on anything right now because I'm just very close to publishing my horror novel. It's coming out on Valentine's Day, but I'm thinking that I would like to write a horror novel per year. So next year, something else will come out. but I haven't got the idea as yet. I just know I want it to be horror. So stay tuned. I also run a horror themed book club on Instagram. So I have a blog as well, which I blog twice a week. So I've got a lot of writing and creative projects that I'm doing anyway.
Make sure to follow her again, folks. All the information needed will be in the description as well as the banners below. Follow her and make sure to also follow her on the Amazon page. The cool thing about that is you can follow the author and you'll get notifications anytime they drop a book. So the moment the pre-orders open up for the Valentine's Day horror series that she's going to drop, you can hop on. And the moment that it does drop, you can just go and pick it up immediately. And as you can tell already, the covers are going to be well worth it, folks. The ebook is awesome, but I would definitely get the hardcover of her shit. Well worth the money, I think.
Thank you.
So again, thank you for coming on. Everything that you're doing, the blogs, I'm just a huge fan. I cannot wait to see your continued progress. I wish you the best, and I cannot wait to have you on again. In a couple months, you'll see your progress again. Yeah, definitely. I want to start doing some author, especially with CT. I want to get you and CT together and we just have a nice little powwow. Yeah, awesome. So again, thank you for everything. That's going to be the end of the podcast. AR's Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I've been AR, and this has been the awesome, inspirational Rebecca. You already know. Check with us next week for our next episode. Peace out.